I want to welcome everyone to The Beat. I'm Ari Melber, and out of Washington, we are following what can truly be described as unusual breaking news. This is truly unusual breaking news. You know the breaking news animation. You know sometimes the news is big, significant, serious. This one is unusual. A major escalation in what is increasingly a kind of political, quiet, peaceful civil war, but a civil war of political proportions for MAGA over these Epstein files. And it's roiling the Trump administration at quite literally the highest levels. Sources detailing the ongoing clash over a fight that could cost someone their job. Trump's Attorney General Pam Bondi clashing with the FBI number 2 official Dan Bongino. As everybody who follows these kind of stories knows, technically the AG oversees the FBI, but if you remember Comey or other strong-willed FBI officials, when you're at that number 1, number 2 level, they sometimes fight with the DOJ. Sources say Bongino is so upset about all this, he's saying maybe he'll just leave, which would be a very quick tenure, by the way, and he would be leaving in a sort of protest or criticism of Bondi's handling of the Epstein files. Other outside agitators, including Tucker Carlson, saying she's lost confidence, maybe she has to go. He was not at work today, reportedly. Sources also say Bondi and Bongino got into a heated clash Wednesday in a high-level meeting with him, her, FBI Director Patel, and Donald Trump's number 1 person who tracks all this stuff and makes the big staffing decisions, Susie Wiles, the chief of staff, who, of course, also ran the Victorious campaign. Axios has a report on this where Pam says her piece, Dan says his piece, didn't end on friendly terms. Bongino left angry. And you don't need to be a scholar of reporting or Watergate level intrigue to know somebody in this small meeting is leaking this stuff to Axios if it's true. A source close to Bongino saying he ain't coming back. Out of control furious is the other quote. This destroyed his career. He's threatening to quit and torch Pam unless she's fired, said someone who, again, according to that reporting, spoke with Bongino. By the way, hire podcasters and right-wing media figures to run major parts of the government, and you may find major parts of the government are being leaked on and run like another piece of podcast content. I'll come back to how some of this does swirl around MAGA content. Other parts of it, of course, are serious when you think about the victims in the original Epstein case. All of this, though, occurred because the DOJ has fallen short of the pledges that people around Trump, including Bondi, made. There were many questions about the Epstein case. From the moment of his in-custody death, this news program, for example, has reported on those questions. There are some suspicious details. This news program has not done what a lot of the internet and MAGA right-wing sort of circles have done, which is assert without evidence what maybe happened and then wait for the government to confirm it. Now we're seeing significant backlash from MAGA, probably some of the loudest against Trump since he took office. Journalists, other people following Doge and Musk may be reporting one set of problems to the administration, but on the right, this is the big problem. All of this is because it was partly stoked by the very people who now say nothing to see here. They stoked this conspiracy which imploded on them.
The DOJ may be releasing the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients? Will that really happen?
It's sitting on my desk right now.
In Epstein's case, it is incredibly disturbing. We have flight logs, we have information, names that will come out.
What names are in there, man? You understand how many powerful people probably want this thing to desperately go away?
The FBI airmailed into that operation and said, this is not getting out. Because they do that because this is another government gangster operation.
Seriously, we need to release the Epstein list. That is an important thing.
Release the list. That's the now vice president. The list's on my desk, the attorney general. The government gangsters, quote unquote, are in charge of all this stuff. The problem is they caught the car. All those people talking up that way now have the goods. They're in the government. They used to be pointing their finger. They found it pointing at themselves, like many an old internet meme, and it's blown up on them. So this matters politically because one or more people may be out of a job. It matters in a deeper sense because we're seeing the limits of governing by clickbait or political conspiracy theory. It also could matter if any of it got back to the real questions about the Epstein case, not whether Pam Bondi was lying when she said she had an Epstein list or is lying now when the memo says it doesn't exist, but can't be both. Now, in the FBI, there's a wider dysfunction involving some of these same people who we know from what they're saying have been spending many, many days, a lot of their energy on a client list they now say doesn't exist, But the Times is reporting that the FBI is taking the unusual step of using lie detectors for loyalty tests, subjecting personnel to questions as specific as to whether they've criticized or, quote, cast aspersions on Patel, who you just saw in that other clip talking about gangsters. This looks like something from a movie or another era, but according to the Times, it's happening. And in Trump's DOJ under Bondi, there's also a purge because there are officials who say they might be targeted not for how they're doing their job, but whether they're insufficiently, quote, politically loyal to Bondi and Trump. Fired without explanation, a culture of fear is how the Post describes it. And so one more point on all this tonight. What started as a very real question about a suspicious in-custody death, any journalist or lawyer could tell you if the government's holding a high-profile detainee and they die under suspicious circumstances, you want to investigate that. What started with something real morphed into a MAGA conspiracy theory that was sold so hard by these leaders that it's blown up in their face. And more than almost anything Trump has done thus far in the second term, and you follow the news, you're familiar with it, this is the thing saddling Trump. This is the thing that has them leaking on each other, fighting with each other, talking about not coming back to work, all because the story they sold themselves blew up on themselves. I want to bring in our experts, Michelle Goldberg from the New York Times and MSNBC analyst, and Alencia Johnson, who worked on the Harris 24 campaign and wrote Flip the Tables, Everyday Disruptor's Guide to Finding Courage and Making Change. Plenty in there for the times we're in now. Welcome to both of you. Michelle, multiple things can be true. We're all for investigating and holding the government accountable. If there were problems in the original handling of Epstein, it stretches from the Trump folks who were in charge of the Bureau of Prisons at the time. If there was further cover-up or lack of transparency, that would include, of course, the ensuing Democratic administration, and now back to the Trump folks again. So there may be good questions to ask, and yet so many of the questions that have blown up in their face seem to be of their own making. In Bondi's case, saying things that she would know to be untrue.
Yes, certainly. I mean, I should say I don't really have very many priors about this. I'm inclined to believe that if there was evidence that Epstein was murdered, or if there was evidence of a so-called client list, given that we've had first Trump in charge, then Biden, now Trump again, there would be somebody who had the incentive to leak it or to put that out there. You know, that said, there are, as you said earlier, there are a lot of weird things about this case, including now the changed metadata on the tape that they put out. But I think the key is two things. One, that Pam Bondi has made these statements that can't be reconciled. Either she was lying outright and kind of getting the MAGA people's hopes up when she said, I have this list on my desk, you know, or she's lying now when she says no such lists exist and there's nothing there. And I think that part of it is that there's a difference between someone like Pam Bondi, who could have been a Republican official in a lot of different administrations, and someone like Dan Bongino, who is purely a creature of the MAGA world, would never be in the FBI under any other president, and then sort of has no political or entertainment future if he is seen by the MAGA base as a traitor. You know, Pam Bondi is more of a sort of Bill Barr figure, and so they might all despise her. But if they feel really betrayed by Dan Bongino, who I think probably was a true believer that he was going to come in there and they were going to have this cathartic exposure of all their enemies, you know, if he's now seen as being part of a cover-up, I think that's much more of a threat to him personally.
Yeah, I appreciate that breakdown. That makes a lot of sense. Alencia, I want to play the MAGA meltdown over this. For folks who aren't constantly watching The War Room or Tucker, you maybe only have heard some of it. But again, I don't think it's an overstatement that they're more upset about this than most anything that's happened in these first 170 days. Take a look.
Don't tell us all this stuff's coming out and the investigation's massive and the Trump wants it released and then say, oh, there's nothing there.
This stinks. This just reeks.
Pam Bondi needs to be fired. Who is rolling this out? The little rascals?
So I'm going to go throw up, actually.
That is so crazy. This is honestly one of the craziest things I've ever seen in my entire life.
This seems like unforgivable behavior.
Something like this. Here's my gut out.
Alencia.
It's giving Real Housewives of DC.
and a really nasty reunion. But it's interesting. Your lead into that was the point that I've been thinking about. There have been so many egregious things that have happened in this administration. We see unemployment having gone up under this administration. We see this horrible bill that happened last week. We see what is happening with these ICE raids, all of these things that have happened in this first 170 days. And this is the thing that the base is literally crying over on television and on video. And so it will be interesting to see how moving forward, the administration actually starts to bring in some of these MAGA loyalists who, quite frankly, are these conspiracy theorists that they would campaign with, right, in 2024. They brought them into the administration, and now they are infighting and it's leaking out publicly. Is that continuing to erode the trust that the MAGA base has with the Trump administration? And I think it will. It will. Now, I actually don't have a lot of empathy for a lot of MAGA supporters because we've been here before in his first administration, right? He'll make one promise and then go the complete opposite direction. He continues to spew conspiracy theories, or people in his cabinet do, but yet that's actually not enough for people to pump the brakes. And the people who can pump the brakes
Right.
are actually the people.
Let me jump in. But on the politics, you ran with Harris, point and a half race, right? Had it started earlier or different things happen, a point and a half in politics, that's not a Reagan landslide, right? Things can shift. Bannon says, whatever you think of him on the politics, that if they continue to mess this up, they're going to lose 10% of their base, which in a general election, quick math, would be a 5-point swing, which is pretty striking about how big they think the issue is. Take a look.
For this to go away, you're going to lose 10% of the MAGA movement. If we lose 10% of the MAGA movement right now, we're going to lose 40 seats in 26. We're going to lose the president.
Valencia?
Look, I think you may raise a really good point. You mentioned I work on the Harris campaign. I'm actually in the middle of thinking about the Virginia election, the governor's race. That is one of the first litmus tests of the political parties. And I hate to say this on national television, I actually kind of agree with Steve Bannon that if they continue to lose on some of these campaign promises, I promise you, you will see that in these special elections that are happening this year, right? There are some congressional seats that are up and that are actually very competitive for both parties. You'll also see that in the Virginia race. And then as they continue to fumble their way through this administration, that's only going to help Democrats so long as we know how to take the ball and play offense. That's actually going to give us a lot to work with come next year in 2026 and potentially pick up some seats that we didn't think would be in play at this point.
Yeah. Well, Michelle Valencia mentions, reality shows, and it's that kind of thing. And of course, we have a reality show president. And I'm curious what you think about the extreme impact here of what, for many of these people, is content. This is not lawyers doing an administrative review of the original in custody death and reading the Inspector General report. This is people who, like other conspiracy theories, which we've seen across the spectrum, but lately more extreme on the right, and that's documented, finding the content important, and if it blows up in their face, they're so mad they might not support the politician. I'm curious your sort of analysis of that, Michelle, about such a content-dependent movement.
Well, for one thing, the dependence on content is why this became a central issue in their movement in the first place, right? I mean, don't forget, Jeffrey Epstein killed himself during the first Trump administration. So the idea that, and not in 2019. So the idea that this is some sort of Joe Biden cover up that Trump had no part of was always a kind of made for TV or made for TikTok or made for Rumble narrative that they spun up to create this kind of really juicy, dramatic, mysterious stakes around this election. And again, I think that you can't underestimate the kind of mythic role that Jeffrey Epstein plays in their entire worldview. There's a way in which the Jeffrey Epstein story dovetails with the QAnon story that, that we have been ruled by these elites who are persecuting Trump in order to gain immunity for their sex trafficking operations. And part of the promise, I think, was that Trump was going to reveal all. They were going to be proved right. They were going to see their enemies punished. And so that it kind of ends in this kind of womp womp fizzle. It both is bad for the content that they've created, but it's also bad for them as creators because they've all been complicit in selling their audience a story that's been discredited.
Really smart. I mean, exactly. If the cover up, and we're not reporting there is a cover up, but if the cover up is about what happened to Epstein when he was in federal custody in 2019, it involves those individuals in the Trump administration, whether by mistake, malpractice, malfeasance, or not reportable, the allegation of whether there was some sort of hit. All of that is under the auspices of the federal government run by Trump and all the BOP and everything else. So as you say, they had to do a lot of work to get that twisted into something else. And now it's twisted again. Michelle and Alencia, thank you. Have a great weekend. Coming up, we look at the top podcasters who were MAGA calling out Trump.
I voted for none of this. He's doing the exact opposite of everything I voted for.
Trouble all over the right-wing media sphere, and Paul Krugman on the tariffs and the devastating Medicaid cuts.
To tattoo this disgusting abomination of a bill to the foreheads of every single Republican who voted for it.
That's what he's vowing, and we'll get into it. But when we're back in 90 seconds, a very special conversation we're convening tonight on a Friday with a little bit of time to really get into what you need to know about this populist wave in the New York City primary, the talk of democratic socialism. What does it mean for the country? Two experts, either side of the Democratic debate, next. If you watch MSNBC and then see someone who works on MSNBC out walking around, you might have questions for them. The question I've been getting more lately than any other is, what's up with the New York mayor's race and this new star and what's going to happen? I don't know what's going to happen. I always tell people that when they ask. But I can tell you what is going on. New York City had a total upset. The Democratic mayoral candidate now for the party is a relatively young Zoran Mamdani, 33 years old. Few had heard of him a year ago. His progressive policies powered him to take on Andrew Cuomo and win, a name that in New York and around the country is known far more than his. The message, though, was laser focused on kitchen table priorities, affordability, and the kind of progressive populism which Democrats have sometimes lost sight of, and it worked.
We live in the most expensive city in the United States of America. It's also the wealthiest city in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, and yet 1 in 4 New Yorkers are living in poverty. City-run grocery stores, I proposed a pilot program of 1 store in each borough. I'm going to freeze the rent for more than 2 million rent-stabilized tenants, taking the slowest buses in the nation, making them fast and free, and delivering universal childcare. Tax the top 1% of New Yorkers. These are New Yorkers who make $1 million a year or more. Increase the minimum wage to $30 an hour by 2030. Why I call myself a democratic socialist is the words of Dr. King. There must be a better distribution of wealth for all of God's children in this country.
MLK-style redistribution of wealth and just pounding affordability. He's now the Democratic nominee, which means a lot in a Democratic city like New York. There is the Eric Adams of it all, the current mayor, who was so unpopular in the party after a lot of things that he did and what happened that he's just running as an independent. But there's this other wrinkle you heard Mamdani mention there. He's on the Democratic Party ticket, but he, like AOC, is more of a democratic socialist, which deals with decentralized socialist economic systems within a democracy. It's a system where ordinary people, according to its advocates, will have a real voice in workplaces, neighborhoods, and society. That's how the DSA puts it, and collectively own the economic drivers which dominate our lives today. That includes, quote, energy production, transportation. They call it a democracy powered by everyday people. And while this was once considered far left of mainstream Democratic politics and something that was not common to run on in a big race, say a big city or statewide, it has proven to be more and more appealing. You can think of Bernie Sanders or AOC. You can also think on the negative side of the frustration with a cruel capitalism that continues to grind on with billionaires in the sky and wasting their money while a lot of people suffer. Now, I am describing that side. There is another side. Many people view this as unworkable or, frankly, unfair. Critics say that this style of democratic socialism, if you actually instituted it, particularly in a big city like New York, which has a lot of challenges, problems, housing issues, Wall Street, its headquarters, that you will end up potentially doing more harm than good.
He ran a campaign on affordability where none of the things he promised can happen realistically in the way that he promised them.
I think there's a question about whether or not he can deliver affordability.
The policies that he's outlined are not policies that are good for New York.
I'm very concerned about Mr. Mamdani's policies and the economic impact that they will have.
I don't think they work.
And whether Mamdani's particular policies will work to do that,
that was
he
the
really
focus.
struck me as a politician native to this era of concerns.
One outlet, Politico, says Mamdani will have a tough time paying the tab, and beneath the sheen of what they call that populist platform is a, quote, morass of necessary state approvals that threaten his plans, reviews that suggest he could be underestimating the costs, even as he calls to tax more and spend more, and ambitious proposals could actually cost tens of billions more than he says. So let's bring in on this Friday 2 experts with a lot of experience to have this conversation. We've set aside the time. Richard Farley is what you might call a Wall Street Democrat. He is a Wall Street lawyer, has a lot of experience litigating and working in New York with those type of firms, with that business, and also the author of several books, including the apropos Wall Street Wars, the epic battles that Washington created, that they created the modern financial system, I should say. And Faz Shakur, who many remember as a top Bernie Sanders aide, he now runs the nonprofit media organization More Perfect Union, which isn't technically democratic socialism, but he's certainly worked with and around these policy proposals. Hey, welcome to both of you. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
Sorry.
Faz, let's start with policy. What does democratic socialism mean if you're going to use it to run a large city, state, or even a country?
Simply put, right now we have a age and a society that you know well, Ari, is governed by massive wealth and income inequality. And in that period of time, we are worried about the concentration of ownership at the top and the power that they have over the economy and the political system. Meanwhile, people living paycheck to paycheck getting screwed by the outcomes. And we could go through the outcomes. I'll spare you the time and energy, but you could look at housing and transportation and healthcare. We could spend the whole show talking about healthcare, but the outcomes are terrible and getting worse for working class Americans. And that working class dynamic is not just people without a college degree making under $100,000 a year. That dynamic is now people who are $250,000, $500,000 anesthesiologists who are going to be replaced by AI. The concerns of the greater wealth and power by a few over everybody else is really the core issue of the day.
So, Richard, you're not a MAGA right-winger. You care about a lot of causes that include liberal causes, civil rights, but you've generally felt that Wall Street and business can be quite good. What's wrong with, what do you oppose in what Faz or Mamdani is saying?
Well, I think Faz identified the issues very well. The question is, which policies are going to mitigate these issues? And I think that the laws of supply and demand are not going to be repealed. And if you have a housing affordability issue, the answer is to build more housing. And government can do that by allowing the private sector, by reducing costs and expense and regulation, and by providing tax incentives and other things, and by eliminating rent control to make it much more easy for additional housing units to be built and better housing, just to take housing as an example. So I don't think we quarrel over the issues and the problems. I think the solutions may be an area where we have some disagreement.
And on that, let's put up some of the budget, the sort of spending proposals that he has in New York. Of course, this could be in other cities. You could pro-rata it. Look at it. It's more spending. Are you okay with any of this, Richard, or you think most of this ultimately won't work?
Well, let's go through it very quickly. I think freezing rent is going to increase the housing affordability issues because you will get less housing. I think the buses, again, it's going to cost probably another $800 million to $1 billion. I'm not quite sure that the answer to that is to effectively pass that cost on to all New Yorkers, because remember, that's a state issue with the MTA. In terms of free childcare, and I think he's proposing it through age 6. I think the $8 billion is probably on the low side. I think that could be a very large expense in the budget. And we have to figure out how we're going to pay for all this. And it's very easy to say.
Let me bring in Faz. I get that. That makes sense. Faz?
We're the richest in the richest country in the history of the world, and the richest city in the richest country. Yeah, I think we've got some money. And the question is whether that money is doing anything to improve the standard of living for people who are trying to afford a place to live, whether they can afford to transport themselves to their jobs, whether they can afford childcare. So I would agree. I mean, there's probably a lot of areas of agreement I assume Richard and I could find around building affordable housing and the need to change some of the zoning and conversions of units. My point would just be that at the end of the day, the way we measure these outcomes, which by the way have been worse and worse outcomes, you have to start with that. I mean, are we starting with the premise that for the past 30 or 40 years, things have gotten worse for working class New Yorkers? It is more unaffordable. So if you start with that premise, we can't stay status quo. Now, I'm oriented around the nature of, as we build affordable housing, what is the price point? Can we get people with 2 kids living in the city so that they can work at Pfizer? I'm less worried about the Pfizer C-suite. I'm worried about the Pfizer clerk and the janitor. Can they still stay in this?
And let me, because we're rooting this around Mamdani, let me play a little more what he said on MSNBC about his plans. Take a look.
Municipal grocery stores, I proposed a pilot, 1 in each borough. That's 5 in total, at a total cost of $60 million. Free buses costs about $700 million a year. Universal childcare around, let's say, $6 billion. Ideas of taxing the 1% and the most profitable corporations to fund a more affordable life for all are things that actually have quite a bit of support within the legislature. I believe that this is both feasible and necessary, but I'm going to meet with business leaders about this.
Richard?
Yep. I don't think New York residents are undertaxed. I'll start from that premise. And I also think at some point, we don't know what that is, when you raise taxes beyond a certain point, moving jobs and people moving outside of the city, which they can easily do, is going to have a real risk of exodus and net loss of tax revenue. Now, we also have to look at where we are. Now, we have the big, beautiful bill, and no one really knows what impact that's going to have on revenues coming in from the federal government. New York State has its own issues with respect to the budget. Healthcare outside of New York City is a real crisis in New York State because of the expense and the loss of the tax base upstate. So at this point in time, is this really the time for New York City to be taking on more municipal obligations? I think
and let me broaden.
It's very concerning.
Let me take that to Faz and put up the maps of some of the other countries, because most of our viewers are all over the country, not in New York. And the Democratic Party is debating this at an AOC Bernie level outside of New York. And when you look at the economic growth there, Faz, what is the core message you think of folks like Sanders or Mamdani if this were nationalized for America, that we could have decent growth like these countries and a more livable life? How would you present it to the rest of the country?
Well, firstly, I mean, very basically, we need to raise a living wage, the minimum wage to a living wage. That seems very core, that people should be able to, they're going to be working class people, they should be able to get by, for they're going to be able to afford a place to live, afford childcare. Those price points of these things has become unaffordable in a city that's dominated by greater concentration of the elite. And if you allow the system, as you know, we're talking about here, that the fear that the billionaire class could flee the city. Well, what about the millions and millions of people who need to live in the city? That's the orientation we want to start with. Billionaires have already fled New York City. If you look under Mayor Adams, about $9 to $10 billion have left the city. Now, the question is, like, can we afford to bring the vibrancy of New York City back such that it doesn't just become a city of extreme wealth and the people who are the very elite? And if you're going to do that, the vibrancy of people being able to purchase affordable groceries, affordable housing, affordable childcare should take front and center. And having places of both residence and, commerce, how do you cater to that kind of people? I always hear the fear of, like, well, the elite are going to be so mad. Well, yeah, the elite are doing just fine. What about the 60% of people living paycheck to paycheck? Let's have them as our top concern.
And it goes, that orientation also goes to why so many national Democrats are watching this closely, thinking about, okay, Trump promised a whole different agenda. He talked about populism, even if he didn't deliver it. And there is some energy, particularly among younger voters, for this. Richard and Faz have agreed to stick around. We wanted to give this the time it deserves. So we're going to fit in a break. You know why we have those breaks, Faz? Because those companies, you know, they sell the ads, you know,
Pay
it's
the
that
bills.
whole system we're in. But all jokes aside, we'll be back with these two to finish the conversation and discuss the politics of a counter MAGA populism when we come back.
The era of big government is over, but we cannot go back to the time when our citizens were left to fend for themselves. Our responsibility begins with balancing the budget in a way that is fair to all Americans. We move into the era of balanced budgets and smaller government.
President Clinton leading the Democrats to smaller government. Now there is energy in New York with Bernie, with AOC, for larger government and democratic socialism as at least part of the solution. We've been having this debate. This is closing arguments, 60 seconds. Richard, what should the National Democratic Party do with this interest in democratic socialism?
Look, you saw in the clip that Laura Gillen, who is in a suburban seat in the New York metropolitan area is running away from Mamdani. I think likewise, Pat Ryan and Tom Suozzi are also going to be very concerned if he gets elected. And I also think it's a gift to Nick LaLota and Mike Lawler, who will probably go from competitive districts to very safe seats. This is a gift to the National Republicans on a silver platter.
Faz.
Politically, I hope that for all the wobbly Democrats out there, you see that Zoran is bringing into the Democratic tent a whole hell of a lot of people who didn't vote in 2024. He's exciting people, young people in particular. He's expanding the opportunity of Democrats to win if you give him a shot. Zoran is a very talented and smart person. He has a view of the political economy that understands the role of the state has to address the condition of working class people. But he's somebody to be reasoned with, to talk to. And I think the more we demonize and we play scare tactics, all we do is lend less credibility that the Democratic Party can stand up to powerful elites for working class people. Zoran's doing it. I hope more people give him a chance to succeed.
Yeah, look, there's been a lot of interest, intrigue, and hype, criticism, et cetera, about this topic and this race. Both of you have conducted yourself with precision and examples and logic and reason. Imagine that in political debates. Maybe we need more of this and less of the candidates. I want to thank you both, Faz
I would
and
agree
Richard.
with that.
Appreciate you guys.
Yes, and thanks for the
Thank you for
opportunity.
having me, Ari.
Absolutely. Thanks to both of you. We come back with longtime author, New York Times columnist, professor, now Substack writer, economist Paul Krugman. Next.
The one big ugly bill that has been jammed down the throats of the American people represents the largest assault on Medicaid and health care in American history.
That's new from Speaker Jeffries today. We're joined now by Paul Krugman, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, longtime author, writer, and now the editor, publisher, and writer of the Paul Krugman Substack newsletter, which has gained quite a following. Welcome back.
Hi there.
These healthcare cuts are massive. If you put aside the legal and constitutional questions facing this administration, which are huge, I wonder if healthcare cuts might be the most significant short-term, immediate impact damage on working people and the biggest issue of the year. What do you think?
Oh, sure. I mean, look, the United States is, we're alone among wealthy countries in not guaranteeing health care for everybody. So we start out with a system that is already treats ordinary people worse than our counterparts in the rest of the world. But at least it had gotten better thanks to the expansion of Medicaid, thanks to the Affordable Care Act. And now you're taking a hatchet to that. And this is going to not just mean that many millions of people are going to lose health insurance. It's going to ramify through the system. There's going to be a lot of hospitals closing because people can't afford to go there. Kind of ironically, the worst impacts are going to come in areas that voted for Donald Trump, rural areas, because those are, there's no risk that those of us in New York City are going to find that there are no nearby hospitals left, but in a lot of the country there will be. This is just incredibly cruel and incredibly ignorant about how people live. That's what strikes me in these arguments. They keep on saying, people should get off Medicaid and get a job, as if, every job comes with health benefits. That's not the America I know.
No, I mean, it's such a funny talking point, funny bad, not funny haha, because everybody, you could be not involved in politics at all. Everybody knows that all kinds of gigs and jobs you get, hardworking jobs, labor jobs, building stuff, helping with a house, helping with a move, gig economy, TaskRabbit, waiting tables, one of the first jobs I had. You don't have healthcare. So then you say, okay, what do we want to do with those folks? To your point, I want to play you something out in the discourse. You always used your New York Times perch, and now your writing, which is reaching many people, as I said, to call it like it is. That's hard for some people for some reasons. But in the new podcast sphere, you have people who aren't trained journalists or writers, but some of them are now saying, hey, okay, I rode this MAGA wave, but I didn't know it was going to be this. Maybe they were honestly underinformed or whatever. Here's Andrew Schultz. He's got a big following. Take a listen.
There'll be people that they'll DM me and be like, you see what your boy doing? You voted for this. I'm like, I voted for none of this. He's doing the exact opposite of everything I voted for. Yeah. I want him to stop the wars. He's funding them. I want him to shrink spending, reduce the buddies. He's increasing it.
As someone at the intersection of policy and public communication, what do you see there, and what do you think should be done in the democracy, or what should be said to folks who may be evolving? I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a revelation. It's frustrating because it's not as if Democrats didn't try to tell people that this was what was coming. But all right, that's where it is, and it is. Look, what's really important to understand is that these are wildly unpopular policies. The Republicans seem to think that because Medicaid is a means-tested program, that is welfare, and therefore people must be against it and think it's only for people who aren't like them. But people have to realize Medicaid is astonishingly popular. I actually did a comparison. Medicaid is literally more popular than apple pie. It's like plus 80% approval of Medicaid. It's even Republicans overwhelmingly think Medicaid is a good thing because we're Americans. We believe that our fellow citizens should be able to receive essential health care. And now what they're trying to do is pretend, we're only going to kick off the undeserving, lazy people who refuse to work. But of course, essentially those people don't exist. There really isn't a large number of people receiving Medicaid who shouldn't be. So this is going to cut deep into the lives of tens of millions of Americans. Practically everybody is going to know somebody who's suffering because of these cuts.
Right. And then they're the ones answering back because they were publicly Trump. Some of them are saying, not this. I didn't want this. I think what you just said connects to a type of defensiveness there. As for the apple pie issue, Professor, while apple pie is synonymous with America and fairly popular, as you say, it can get quite mushy. And so as compared to a cobbler or a blueberry, I think you have a 20-25% holdout there, people who find it to be a mushier pie. I won't make you comment on that because this isn't an open-ended podcast, but I did want to ask you about the latest tariffs. You've been counseling people on how to make sense of it. Some of it is theater, some of it's ineffective, but Trump is going after some of these countries, and you wrote about Brazil as well. What should we know?
What you should know, first off, is that Trump is clearly breaking the law. People aren't saying this enough, but we have a system that gives presidents a lot of authority to set tariffs. And that's kind of unfortunate that, there were judgments made that presidential discretion was a good thing. But the allowed reasons for tariffs do not include that you're mad at Brazil because they're putting the guy who tried to overturn an election on trial. That is not a legitimate reason for the U.S. president to impose a tariff. So this is flat out lawlessness on the part of Trump. And it's also stupid. I mean, the idea that a country of 200 million people, which has its, you know, they have their own pride, they have their own patriotism. And by the way, we're only their number 3 export market after China and Europe. The idea that we can bully them into basically, you know, abandoning democratic principles is really stupid. The other big tariff announcement has been copper. And, you know, copper isn't everything. This raises the cost of manufacturing, it raises the cost of everything. And yeah, if we keep high tariffs on copper, we will probably start to produce more copper in the United States. But I've been looking into this. How long does it take to get a new copper mine going? And the
I
answer
have
is at
no
least
idea.
10 years. Right. So this is not going to bring back the U.S. copper industry until, you know, several presidents down the pike. So this is complete. It just makes U.S. everything else in America costlier and makes our industry less competitive.
Yeah. All a clear breakdown and good to know. Paul Krugman, thank you for joining us. Again, people can find Paul Krugman's newsletter by Googling Paul Krugman Substack. We'll be right back. Thanks for watching The Beat. You can always connect with me at arimelber.com. I wish you a great summer weekend. I'll see you back here on Monday.